Alright, here we go. So this is my episode 2 of Gamer Gripes, and in today's episode we're going to be going over Mad Max. So let's take a look at what this game's all about and what my gripes are. So as you can see, it's a really vast land. Of course, looks absolutely great, except for the part where occasionally what's going to happen is, regardless of whether you have an Nvidia card or an ATI card, it's going to go ahead and stutter on you. Now, this would all make complete sense had the game looked something, you know, like Metal Gear Solid 5, where there's a vast draw distance, but there's a lot of detail. However, in this game, there's mostly just barren sand, the occasional waving flag, some bad guys, and a couple of cars, and just some minor vegetation. So there's not really a whole lot going on there that's kind of out of the ordinary as far as graphics settings go, and yet stutter still occurs. And while I give Avalanche guys quite a bit of credit for what they've done, it still feels like it shouldn't be the case in a game that's quite so new and in an engine that's otherwise performing so flawlessly, even when there's explosions happening all the way around. So here's another gripe for you guys. After about 50 frickin' outposts of beating these guys Batman style, you pretty much kind of get tired of the same basic combat that you used to have before. And while you do get some pretty cool Shiv Punishers occasionally, you do get to use some pretty nice melee weapons, it definitely sucks that there simply isn't a whole lot you can do aside from taking out your shotgun and having Max kind of stand there Resident Evil 4 style to take a shot. Now, while it's really fun to be able to do that on occasion, it most certainly does get old very quickly. And the problem there is that there's simply not enough stuff given to you as the player to be able to counter different enemies as the progression moves on. And the other issue is that despite the fact that different enemies do appear in the game, they're still pretty much entirely humanoid, and you don't get a whole lot of options in terms of taking them out. Dispatching them largely still results in you having to headshot them and or otherwise beat them into a pulp, and overall the strategy does not change in between the different enemies that you do fight. Now, even though they do tend to get tougher over time, and occasionally you will have to kind of take a little break because Max will get punished quite significantly, the general strategy never changes, and so over time, beating everybody and going from one outpost to the next simply results in a game that looks more like Assassin's Creed than anything else in terms of the way everything performs, and that's a real shame considering the fact that there's so much you would think there would be a potential in the Wasteland that simply doesn't get exploited. There's another fun fact. Max seems to be quite an agile fellow, being able to do some pretty serious combat rolls, some pretty serious jumps as well, quite a few dives here and there. But the problem is, when it comes to climbing ladders, you will see something very interesting that Max is able to do as well, despite having a pretty busted leg. As you can see, he has the brace that he's had from the Mad Max films, and yet somehow he's able to slide downstairs extremely quickly. Now, how he's able to do so while still having that busted leg really doesn't make sense. It seems just really odd that he would be able to do so, considering that if you jump off a certain height and don't land it well, Max actually ends up stumbling, and I wasn't able to quite replicate it that time, but it does happen, and it's just strange that Max wouldn't be able to do so. But something else that's quite frustrating is that despite the fact that he's able to do these combat rolls, his jumps are only so high. And now, I'm not expecting Max to be an Assassin's Creed type parkour artist, but considering that he can't jump out a freaking window without having to actually press a stupid jump key, I mean, you'd think that his movement would be much more fluid than what you're seeing in here. Instead, you're relegated to doing combat rolls. Now, of course, not every character is going to be necessarily a freerunner or parkour artist, and that's entirely understandable, as Max was never quite that agile in the films. But considering the animations that are in place, you would really think that he'd be able to do a whole lot more than these simple animations that are in place for him. As for staying in the same location, guys, but I think I do want to get this point across as well, which is that after a while in the game, you end up having to do these basically balloon missions where you end up going up in a balloon and exploring the nearby area. The same principle kind of applies as in the towers in Assassin's Creed, and I apologize for making the same kind of analogies here, but that's just because they literally ripped this completely out of the Assassin's Creed series as far as exploring your environment goes. Now, I don't really understand what the need for this fog of war is, but after you've done this about 20 times, it quite frankly just gets old. So you would think that they would have varied up this slightly by letting you climb a tower and using your binoculars, or using an airplane like in one of the Mad Max movies, or perhaps even a gyrocopter. That just simply would have made a lot more sense. Instead, you end up looking around like a complete idiot and just scouting the area every single time. And you would think you'd be able to upgrade the skill by having Max just automatically tag all of these locations, but that never quite happens either. So given this repetitive slog that you end up having to go through every single time, I would want to say that Picard is face-bombing somewhere in the galaxy somewhat far away. This game, you have this massive world that you're able to explore and take a look at. As you can see, I still have about half the map not explored and not even traveled through, but I can only expect that things aren't going to change very much. Now, as in the case of most other Wastelands, such as in the game Wasteland 2, or for example the Fallout series, you get quite a bit that you can do and quite a bit that you can explore in general. However, in this game, your side missions are pretty much limited to beating up thugs in different various oil mining sites, exploring for gold, occasionally looking for some kind of different new vehicle part that's mission-based, but beyond that, there's really not a whole lot you can do in terms of exploring the wasteland and adding to your collection. So if, for example, you want to add a weapon to Max's collection, you can't do so, and as a result, it makes the game feel quite a bit dull. Now, while you can travel to different directions quite quickly, and the game makes that fairly easy for you, it does get tiring after a while in that there's only a few fast travel locations, and you can't do a fast travel to just about every location that you unlocked, only certain ones that the game has determined for you. Now, this is very frustrating because it takes quite a few steps back from a lot of modern games out there that have done this, and if you've noticed, games like Fallout allow you to travel pretty much anywhere, as do a lot of other open world games nowadays where you've discovered a city or a different outpost, so it seems completely out of place that this would happen here. But beyond that, you also have different missions for different kind of fortresses or strongholds. But the problem is every single one of the stronghold leaders, despite having a seemingly different problem on the surface, ends up having to ask Max for help with the same exact things. They all need an armory, they all need water, they all need oil, but yet all of them achieve it in the same exact way. And you would think that somebody who's been around surviving in the wasteland for so long would have the manpower to be able to keep things going, and yet all of them seem to have to rely on the player to get something done. And it doesn't make any sense considering that they have the manpower to get whatever they want done, and yet they simply refuse to do it. You might be wondering, well, is there something cool to this that you might be able to explore? Potentially bikes, big trucks, or something along those lines. Well, you'd be disappointed to know that Mad Max offers no such option other than simple sedans for you to drive around. And while different cars have a different purpose in this game, and they have different armor options, typically it's more or less all in the same vein. Meaning if you want to explore the wasteland in a different type of vehicle or cause some really massive havoc, you simply can't do it. Now, if I'm going to show you some of the vehicles that are possible for you to have, there's different car bodies that you can select, and they all look very cool, and you can do different kinds of modifications to them typically, but as you might notice, there's simply not a whole lot that you can do as far as different types of vehicles truly go. As you can see, it's still mostly kind of 70s type cars, and really just not a whole change in terms of how they perform or what they do or their function. You get a different number of stats, such as what kind of weaponry you can mount, their top speed, handling, boost, and whatever kind of damage they can do, as well as if they're good for defense, but that's basically just about it. And it's just really sad considering this vast open world you can only explore in a simple type of vehicle like this. Now, while the game does let you add different vehicles to your collection, you still can't quite use them. And it's really frustrating considering that you do come across vehicles much cooler than the bodies that you get to choose from in the game itself. So this is my final set of gripes for this game. I hope you guys enjoy the video, and hopefully you add some of your own in the comments below, and I'll see you in my next one.